Hello and welcome to Conversations with Hannah and with Mike. I'm here joined today with Senator Mike Moore, and we have both been very active in the effort to educate and inform voters on what Question 4, the legalization of marijuana question, is really all about and what it entails. And we wanted to get together today and sort of give a little perspective on background on why we came to the conclusion that we came to, both having been heavily involved in this issue. I know that Senate President Rosenberg had asked you to be the vice chair of the Special Senate Committee on Marijuana, and you spent quite a bit of time looking into this issue. Why don't you tell us sort of what was the process that you went through? And I know you visited Colorado as well and really gained a lot of insight from that trip.
Well, actually, the Senate President actually put it out for volunteers. So Senator Jason Lewis actually volunteered for the committee. I volunteered, and he had to do it. There were so many committees that were put out that they had to do a second round. And the second round of requests, he actually had quite a few people volunteer for it. And where Senator Lewis was chairing the Public Safety Committee, the Public Health Committee,
yes.
He became the chairman of the committee, and I was appointed the vice chair. And I think that had a lot to do with the public safety background and we were doing. And this is one, I admit, even going into this committee, my feeling towards this question was I was not in favor of it. And I'm going to say that even having realized that how my position has evolved on this, where when I first ran in 2008, I was adamantly opposed to the decriminalization of marijuana. And at that time, I did say, it was the first step in eventually legalization.
Yep.
So we had we all know that passed, and then medical marijuana passed. And I'm going to say where my position has evolved in this is the fact that I realized that the decriminalization was actually the proper way that we should be going to address this.
Sure.
We should be decriminalizing, looking at the penalties and how we address the issues and how we address issues of use of it. We shouldn't be sending people to prison for the use or possession of certain quantities of this.
Which today we don't. Today we have absolutely no one in jail for simple possession.
Exactly.
So that has worked.
That has worked, and we should continue in that.
Yep.
But the overall use legalization of it, I just think there's so many bad policy aspects to this. And so when we went to Colorado, there's 8 senators, and at that point, I think there was myself and maybe one other senator who were leaning against this.
Sure.
By the time we came back, all 8 of us were in opposition to the legalization of it. And a lot of it really had to do with looking at the data, and actually in some cases the conflicting data, where you'd have the industry would come forward. We met with industry, we met with public safety, we met with schools, Public Health, Department of Agriculture, and a lot of the problems is that the data is so conflicting that this is really one issue that you're better off not being the first or second state in the country to initiate this. You're probably better off, if you really want to make the right decision, is waiting 5 or 6 years, look at the data, and then see what it tells you. We had the Rocky Mountain High Drug Task Force coming in, talking about the increased rates of youth use, yet you had the industry telling us, oh no, the rates are going down. We had then the argument of, look, we need to regulate it like alcohol. We're going to have all this money coming in so that you can fund our schools, fund our roads, these public initiatives. And that didn't hold true. And even the tax rate they have in Colorado, which is roughly, I think, 30%, the tax rate here in our referendum is half of that.
It's actually 10%. It's
even less.
Yeah.
So we're going to have less revenue coming in.
Right.
The Department of Agriculture explained to us how they had over 2,000 pesticides that they have to now regulate that are in the growing process. The argument of the black market, that by legalizing you're going to do away with the black market or the drug dealers. Yeah. Well, once you start taxing it and have the higher rate, you still have the black market.
Right.
And then they still have the issue with the people growing it at their homes, where their legislation allowed for 6 plants.
Right.
So what it does is it allows for someone who has wants to grow at the house, they can grow 6 plants for themselves. But they can also grow 6 plants for you. They can grow 6 plants for however many people they want. So,
Right.
so you've got these little homegrown cultivation areas now,
Yep.
which again feeds into the black market. And then there's no control on the potency of it. And that was another issue. I think the phrase that stuck with me, that I heard out there that has stuck with me to come back is that this is not the marijuana that your grandparents smoked.
Right.
It was roughly 3% 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Now, just for the cigarette or the
joints,
joint,
yeah.
it's 18%. So it's 6 times the potency. And then the edibles, it's to 80 to 90%.
Right.
And and that's causing one, there's no control over the sale and the manufacturing the type of products, and the products that they were shown to us were geared towards kids. So I have yet, in discussions either out there and coming back, when you talk the negatives to the positives, I've yet to have someone give me a long list of positives on
Right.
why we should be doing this, other than regulate it like alcohol, bring the revenue in. And now, again, just to use that analogy, well, go on the internet and Google AA. And you tell me how many towns don't have a single or multiple AA programs in their communities. That this is the model you want to model something at, taking a class one substance, federal substance, and giving the perception that it's legal, so that the public now goes out and even kids go out and think
Right.
that it's okay to use. And
So when you all came back
then
and
there
you
was the
issued,
there was the drug driving.
Yeah, the drug driving
The drug
is a
driving
huge
was a
piece.
big issue up there.
and when you all came back, you issued a 118-page report that really expressed a lot of these public health, public safety, and revenue challenges,
Yeah.
because the revenue is all going to be offset by new costs that we have to bear in the Commonwealth that we don't have today.
Which everyone talks about, less bureaucracy.
Right. So there were a number of us, that took a look at that report. I sit on Public Health Committee with Senator Lewis, and this has been an issue that I had been interested in before entering the legislature, and then took a keen interest in it there. And we pulled together a bipartisan group. So the governor, the Speaker of the House, Boston Mayor Marty Walsh,
Attorney General.
the Attorney General is part of it. And we really said, to some extent, people go into this thinking this is a philosophical question, that they're simply filling in an oval that says, philosophically, do you think marijuana should be legalized? And there are people who may actually believe it should be legalized, but who also understand that this would not be the way that you want to go about doing it. And so from the beginning, much like Ohio voters who a year ago had a similar ballot question, who again, if you polled them initially, voters in Ohio thought conceptually marijuana should be legalized, but they took a look at the ballot initiative and they said, oh, but this is not the way we think it should be done. And that's really what we're expressing to voters here. The 24-page ballot question was written by the marijuana industry. Unlike legislation, which
Has
we
many
know very well,
loopholes.
right? It has many loopholes, and unlike typical legislation that moves through the State House, where everyone has a chance to come and testify and be at the table and weigh in with their perspective, this was written, by the industry for the industry with no other involvement, and so it is the industry's perspective of the world, which is highly advantageous to them and no one else. So when you look at the way in which they wrote the legislation, Colorado was the first state that they were getting it passed, and they basically doubled down on what they did there. So they went from the 6 plants that you could have growing in your home to 12.
Yep.
They went from the fact that in Colorado, it was extremely easy for municipalities to say, no, we don't want this here. And 70% of the communities there opted out and said, this isn't for us. We're not going to have dispensaries or
Which
growers.
naturally, you don't hear that perspective. You just hear it's legal. And
Correct. And so, again, the industry said, we want to solve that problem because we got blocked in
Right.
70% of the communities in Colorado. So here, the way that they wrote it, they require that you have a minimum of 20% of the number of alcohol package stores that you have in your community be allowed as marijuana stores. If you don't want that, if you choose not to do that, you have to have a community-wide referendum, which again, strips away the local controls that exist today, and it also is highly preferential to the industry, who of course will have the funds to wage, a yes vote on keeping marijuana in the community, as opposed to residents who would have to come together, volunteers, to say, no, this is not something that we want to have here. And
there's also some language about the medical, dealing with medical
correct.
marijuana manufacturers right now, that if they're in operation now, you can't put restrictions on them from.
Correct. So they get preferential licensing. So
Yes.
one of the challenges, and Treasurer Goldberg, who has spoken out personally, she's against this ballot initiative and will vote that way. She cannot really be part of our coalition because ultimately it comes to her shop. Yep. That is where the Cannabis Control Commission would live if it gets passed. But she has said one of her biggest concerns is, written into the ballot initiative, is about a year to stand up the entire commission, all the rules and regulations, and to roll this out statewide, which is an incredibly short period of time, and she believes, can't be done. The industry wrote into the ballot initiative that if rules and regs aren't done by January 1st of 2018, the medical marijuana shops can just start selling recreational without any sort of oversight or guidance at that point. They also have preference. So if you live in a community that already has a medical marijuana facility or several, and you wrote existing agreements with them, you may have written an agreement that said you can never sell recreational marijuana.
It's not
becomes invalidated
right.
The date of this vote, and they all have the right to sell.
Right.
So many communities made decisions around medical marijuana, based on their understanding of the current law, not understanding that this ballot initiative would be coming down the road and supersede any agreement that they put in place. So that's one of the reasons why you have the MMA, the Mass Municipal Association, who's the chief advocate for cities and towns, coming out and opposing this ballot question because of the stripping of local control. You have the Mass School Superintendents coming out months ago and saying this would be a very bad thing for our youth if this were to be approved. We just had the School Nurse Association come out and say the same thing. And I know you and I, a couple months ago, actually about a month ago, went to the Health Foundation of Central Mass,
Yep.
which you had set us up to go in and talk to, and they also voted to oppose this and very generously, put some funding behind that as well.
And I think another key factor is everyone's. You hear also about it's another industry. We're creating jobs, economic development. You've got the Associated Industry of Massachusetts,
Right.
the Retail Association of Massachusetts, Construction Industry of Massachusetts, the Business Roundtable, the Cape Cod Chamber.
Right.
So even the industry,
Yep.
the business sector realizes this is bad for Massachusetts
And it's also
and the workforce.
it's also a bipartisan-led initiative. So
Yeah.
not only do we have sort of the governor and the attorney general and the speaker and the mayor out there, but we have 121 colleagues who have joined us in saying this is not the right decision for Massachusetts. And that's really unheard of. We don't have things where you have, we have the most conservative member of the House, and we probably have one of the most liberal members of the Senate who are part of our coalition saying this is not the right decision for Massachusetts. And so,
I'll even take a moderate position on this and say, again, as I was saying earlier, because the data is so conflicting that you have arguments on both sides, why not wait?
exactly.
Let
We
this
don't need
play
to
out.
be on the bleeding edge of this issue.
Right,
We
let
need to
this
be on
play
the
out somewhere
informed
else.
edge. Yeah.
I mean, even the drug driving. This is actually something even before this whole task force got together, I was actually pushing, and to have an issue out there right now where, and this I find very humorous, that when we were out there and I was asking about this issue, they would actually have people say, well, you're better off having someone driving impaired under marijuana than alcohol. Now look at them, and they're like, well, because you're not as aggressive. Yeah, but you still, if your reaction time is reduced,
Right.
you could have someone pulling out in front of you. You could have a kid running out. You can go through a stop sign, red lights. I mean, how to have that logic where you're better off driving under the influence of this
The
than
other
something else.
issue is with the edibles. People are not aware of two things with the edibles that impact drug driving. One, they're over 50% of the sales in Colorado and growing. And as you mentioned earlier, highly potent,
Yep.
geared towards children to be appealing, both in their packaging and then just, you can have anything being edible, anything from a candy, a cookie, a soda, to a salad dressing can be infused with marijuana or sprayed or laced with it. But
Well,
how marijuana impacts you when it's an edible is very different than smoking a joint. When you smoke a joint, you get an instantaneous high. You know that you're experiencing something. When you consume an edible, it can take 20 minutes to 2 hours before you feel the impact of that. So some people, are eating edibles and saying, yeah, I'm fine. Didn't hit me at all. And then they're barreling down, a high-speed highway when all of a sudden the impact of the edible begins
Well,
to be felt.
Just think of everyone. Just put yourself in this situation. You're at someone's house, or you're at a house party, or somewhere. You have a cookie, or you have something. You eat it. 20 minutes goes by, you don't feel something.
Right.
Well, you have another one. You don't have half that cookie,
Right.
or half that thing. Then you're just saying. Then you leave an hour later. Then it hits you. Now you're in a situation that you have extreme amounts of THC in your system. You know, actually, and this is the package that you brought. I've been using this as an example. You know, they're talking about the youth use on this. Well, I don't know if you can catch this, but
We'll put it up on the
you've got,
slide.
we have traditional Pop-Tarts, now you have Pot-Tarts. You look at how they take the traditional foods and beverages that are geared towards kids, and they're remarketing them. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's
And when
outrageous.
they're out of the packaging, they're indistinguishable. You cannot distinguish between a product that's laced with marijuana and without. And what it's led to in Washington State doesn't allow any home growing. And yet, despite that, in their first year after legalization, the number of fatalities where people were impaired by marijuana went from 8% before legalization to 17%. It more than doubled in 1 year. AAA put out a study on that in the last year. And that is really something that we need to understand here. We already have a high number of drunk driving deaths on our roads every year, and we work really, really hard to prevent that. We are now going to be opening ourselves up, if this passes on November 8th, to an increase in the number of drug driving incidents. And that is something which is a direct public safety outcome of legalization. And you know, one of the things that you and I have talked about as well is this really goes far beyond legalization. Again, this was a ballot initiative written by the industry, and it's really about the commercialization. So when we talk
It's a
about
$6 billion industry.
yes, the anticipated size of it in Massachusetts alone in the first 18 to 24 months is over $1 billion. So this is something that would ramp up extremely quickly. And again, when you do surveys on when did people begin using marijuana, 78% of the people who began using marijuana began in their youth.
Yep.
And so the industry, you know, understands that they want to create lifelong users of marijuana. They need to begin targeting.
Similar to the tobacco industry.
Correct.
We did. You know, that's actually another thing that we don't talk about too much is that for those of the public who don't like paying taxes, how few there may be, think about the tax dollars that are being spent by government every year on smoking cessation programs. And now, and we all say how that contributes to rising healthcare costs. Now we're taking a product that even if you take out the THC aspect of it, it's still it's a smokable product that you're going to be inhaling that is going to have the same health effects as smoking a cigarette. So now you're adding costs, and you're going against all the money that we're being spent,
Right.
that's being spent right now to stop smoking.
The other challenge that we know is the impact on youth. And the studies have shown that 1 in 11 adults who uses marijuana becomes dependent on it, which means they need to use it to get through their day. It's part of
Right.
that number drops to 1 in 6 when we're looking at youth. 1 in 6 youth who use will become dependent on it and sort of require it to get through. And you know, the challenge is brain development, which we used to think stopped around 18, 19, 20. We now know goes through age 25 or 30, that our brain is still developing. And for youth who use, that is the key concern, is the impact that it has on their growing brain. It clearly, if you're a daily user, has an impact on IQ. It's been shown to decrease it by 8 or 9 points.
Yes.
And so again, you know, when you take a look at what's happened in terms of youth and their perception of marijuana, 20 years ago, 80% of youth believed that marijuana was harmful and something that they should avoid. Because of the more of a prevalence in terms of even us talking about marijuana,
Right.
that perception of harm has dropped from 80% with our youth down into the 30th percentile. So when you combine a decrease in the perception of harm and then increased access to the drug, that is really where, you know, it's bad news for our kids. And again, you know, for me, this is not an issue of an adult deciding to do something inside their own home. To me, this is a question that has much broader ramifications in society. One, certainly the advertising, there's absolutely no limits on it. While it says you can't directly advertise in something specifically geared towards children, that essentially means it's not going to appear in Sesame Street magazine. It doesn't mean that, it does mean that next time you go to Fenway Park or a Patriots game after legalization, there's a high probability you're going to see a big billboard, and your kids will see it if they're with you as well. Advertising on radio and TV are certainly all areas that our children see and hear. So the impact to them will certainly be on having increased understanding that marijuana is available and geared towards adults. The other piece is we lead in education. You know this because you're chairman of higher ed. Our state is tops in terms of the nation, in terms of education at every level. And we spend a lot of time and a lot of money to make sure that that's consistent. Having more marijuana prevalent in our society where kids have greater access to it and greater ease of use is not helpful in order for us to maintain that excellent education status that we have.
I mean, if you just look, we've got an opiate crisis going on now. We've had alcohol issues, and now we're going to take another substance and give the perception that it's not harmful.
Right.
And the legalization of it gives that perception. So, then there's even the argument that they're using, because I mentioned the opiate crisis, well, marijuana can be used as a step down. There's no medical data to show that.
And opioid use in Colorado is up 350%. And so, clearly there's no relationship between having access to marijuana and decreasing opiate use.
And I think one of the tough things we're going to be facing over the next, was it 6 weeks or 3 weeks?
I think it's like 31 days now.
Yeah. Well, what's the 24th? Because we have the early voting.
Today's the 7th, yes.
Yeah, so we get the early voting, so
Yep.
the 24th. Is this going to be such, and again, because this is an industry-based initiative, there's going to be a lot of deceptive commercials on TV. So we've got to somehow combat that nice family picture and saying this is good for Massachusetts and families when it's bad.
And that's a great point, because 96% of the funds that were recently reported by the yes side of this question came from out of state. So this is really not an initiative sort of driven and led by Massachusetts. This is a national initiative. They were successful in legalizing in 4 states in the West, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska, and then the District of Columbia. And their goal was to come to the East Coast and find an East Coast state that they could flip. And they pegged Massachusetts as being one of the easiest states to flip. And so they landed here. 90% of the funds comes from one PAC. It's called New Approaches PAC. And the PAC is entirely geared towards legalizing marijuana across the U.S. And so I think it's important to understand, and I really look at this, people complain about, folks not working together, elected officials. And this is really a case where you've had, just even from, we're working together on this because we represent the communities and towns of the Commonwealth, and we have people from every corner of Massachusetts in every political stripe, whether you're conservative or liberal, in between, saying this is not the right step for Massachusetts. And we're out here doing this as sort of part of our own concerns about what will happen if marijuana is legalized in this way. And so I think it's really important that people understand too that this is something that is being driven from out of state, looking to essentially make us a business hub for the industry on the East Coast. And we're just not willing to accept that that is good public policy for the citizens of the Commonwealth, and it hasn't been vetted the way good public policy should be.
I can remember sitting in an office, me, you, Senator DiMacedo, and Representative Tim Whalen. And at that point, well, we think the governor's going to have this, we think the AG is going to have this, and now we've got all these, more prominent elected officials against this, and we've actually seen the polls actually come a lot closer now.
And we also have congressional, 4 of our congressmen, Congressman Kennedy, Congressman Keating, Congressman Lynch, and Congressman Nikki Tsongas have all come out and said they are opposed to this. And again, you just don't normally see this level of bipartisan folks coming together and saying this is not the right step for Massachusetts.
And as you were saying too, we're getting a foothold in here. Another issue Colorado has is that because it's legalized here, they've one state is actually suing the state of Colorado
because so much of it goes over the border.
Right. So now that's the foothold they get here. So once you get it legalized here, Now it's going to be in Vermont. It's going to be Rhode Island. It's going to be Connecticut. So then the proliferation of it is going to be spreading. So
Right.
so that then the other states will then look at this issue.
And the governor of Vermont, who is actually a supporter of legalization, calls this ballot initiative a horrible pot bill because he knows that it's going to be extremely detrimental to his state. He doesn't believe that edibles should be part of
Right.
legalization, and he doesn't believe home growing should be. And so people who even support this at a very high level are extremely concerned about this initiative here. So, you know, in the end, you and I are both spending a lot of time out there talking to folks and making sure that people are truly informed on what they're voting on November 8th. It's very easy to just think this is a, you know, conceptual, philosophical question that you're being asked, but it will have deep impacts on their state. The other thing that I have consistently told people is if you asked the majority of us a year ago what were our top 5 priorities for working on legislation in the coming year, this would not have shown up anywhere. Maybe 1 or 2 people legislators would have had on their list. But again, we have enormous issues. You mentioned the opioid epidemic.
Yep.
We are still in a fight for that. We're still losing 4 people a day. We're doing a lot, and I think that those things will have an impact, but it's a hard fight. We're trying to fix the T and focus on our infrastructure needs in the Commonwealth. We're looking at our education and making sure that we're doing all the things that we need to do to provide fundings to the cities and towns to do that.
We've still got an economy issue here.
Correct. And this will become a chief issue that you and I will have to work on and every other legislator moving forward if it passes on November 8th. This isn't sort of you pass it and it just gets dealt with otherwise. One of the issues in Colorado has been the tremendous amount of time that their legislature and governor and elected officials there have had to work on this. Yep. Because, you know, one, it is very difficult to just implement a ballot initiative. We've seen that with medical marijuana. It was one of the reasons it took a while to get it
Right.
rolled out because ballot initiatives are just not the best vehicle for good legislation. But we will have an immense amount of time spent working on this issue.
Okay, because this is not going to be, if the voters pass this, this is going to be debated quite a
Correct.
bit in the legislature. I think,
Looking-
I think we'll go through all the voters, but there will be
Yeah.
changes, significant changes made to this.
So, you know, I think that that's an important thing for people to understand here. You know, we have a lot of things that we need to prioritize in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and this was not one of them that we had on our list going into this. It doesn't mean that it's not an important public policy question around what do we do regarding marijuana. It just means that we have all come together and said this would not be the vehicle to do it in, nor are we at the place and time where we should be looking at this. We should become more informed by the experience of other states that have already gone down this route,
Right.
and make sure if we do take up this issue and look at it, that we do it in a manner that takes the best information that's out there and also all of the public health and public safety concerns into aspect. I want to thank you. We have like 10 seconds.
Well, I just want to say one thing. The other thing, this is a jobs issue. We're looking at providing our workforce with the skills and proper education so that they can fit the need of industry and be successful. You've got the major business advocacy groups, associations here that are coming out opposed to this.
Yes.
They have concerns about a workforce and a workforce coming in that's going to be under the influence of some of these.
Absolutely. They've seen the challenges that Colorado employers have faced from this, and they're very concerned about that.
And it's still going to be, it'll still be illegal federally.
Yes.
So that if you have employers who are drug testing and you have an employee who thinks because it's now legal and you've positive, you can lose your job.
Yes.
There's also an issue with the banking. No one's
It's an
talked about.
all-cash,
This is an
basically.
all-cash industry, so there's
Yes.
going to be a lot of cash on the street.
No, it is. It's a very, very complex public policy question, which would be best dealt with many, many different people at the table taking a look at it
Yes.
rather than through this ballot initiative. So, you know, both of us are encouraging all of the voters out there to take a good hard look at this, and certainly you can reach out to either one of us if you have more questions. But we thank you for taking the time to listen to our show today, and hope that we've helped you make a more informed decision on question 4 on November 8th.
And what was was it Ronald Reagan who said on the drugs, just vote no? So, or just say no. So just remember, just vote no.
Exactly.
Please.
Thank you.